Born into a wealthy and affluent family in Italy 121 AD, Marcus Annius Verus was a philosopher, a scholar, a public official, and ultimately the head of state to the historic Roman Empire. In his youth, Marcus was a hardworking and dedicated student, and the diligence by which he conducted himself aided his rise to prominence in the eye of then-Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian eventually directed his own successor, Titus Aurelius Antoninus, to adopt Marcus and begin teaching him the ways of government and public affairs. Marcus entered the arena of politics in the Roman Senate as consul. Then, in 161 AD, he inherited the emperor's throne after his adoptive father passed away. For 8 years following his ascension, Marcus shared the throne with his brother Lucius Verus. However, a prolonged period of war between Rome and its neighboring states sought to complicate their joint rule. Despite his military efforts yielding a mixed degree of success, Marcus Aurelius is regarded as last in the dynasty of the 5 good emperors of Rome, largely due to the wisdom he exhibited over the course of his life and political career. He was a man that accomplished many feats during his tenure, but all throughout he remained an ardent disciple of philosophy, especially with regard to the doctrine of Stoicism. This ideology was introduced to him via the works of Greek Stoic and former slave Epictetus, and served as a powerful influence on his life and principles.
You are a little soul, carrying about a corpse, as Epictetus used to say.
Stoicism undoubtedly left a lasting impact on Marcus Aurelius, guiding his thoughts and actions, and the respective depth of his intrigue with it is mirrored in much of his own private writings, dubbed Meditations. So what exactly is Stoicism? Well, its roots can be traced to a philosopher named Zeno of Citium. Approximately 300 years BC, Zeno founded Stoicism as a school of thought in the ancient city of Athens, hundreds of years before Marcus Aurelius was even born. And at that, you may be wondering why I've chosen to title this video The Philosophy of Stoicism featuring Marcus Aurelius, not The Philosophy of Stoicism featuring Zeno of Citium. Despite his status as Stoicism's founder, it would not surprise me if you've never even heard of Zeno before now. What distinguishes the vaunted Roman emperor from his Greek counterpart is, in a single word, legacy. Marcus Aurelius is iconic, his words are remembered, his works are remembered. As a historical figure, particularly one representing the mighty city-state of Rome, his actions carry a great deal of weight, and this is emblematic of a core value in Stoic doctrine, a value that grounds it in the real world. You see, Stoicism is more than just an idea, it's a way of life. And in examining its core values and tenets, we begin to understand how Marcus Aurelius applied this philosophy to ultimately make a name for himself. But first, we need to understand the core elements that comprise Stoicism as a worldview.
Look to nothing, not even for a moment, except to reason.
Logic is a concept that thankfully still exhibits an abundance of usage in the contemporary world, albeit from ever increasingly rare sources.
What?
But to say that logic has had a long and integral relationship with the human race is an understatement in and of itself. The core principles of logic are at minimum thousands of years old, and the modern term is refined from the Greek root logos, which translates to word. From here, elementary precepts such as reason, rationality, and meaning can be derived. Logos is merely a third of a holy trinity by which all manifestation of human will is prescribed. The other elements of this trinity include ethos, that is, the Greek term for character, and the root from which we derive the term ethics, and pathos, which I frequently analogize with. And in short order you will come to find out why that is. Generally speaking, logos, ethos, and pathos are regarded as pillars of argumentation, namely of persuasion, but they also model why humans act and think as we do, in a propositional sense. Within a person's worldview as modeled by Stoicism, logos fulfills the role of facilitation. In other words, Stoicism is a system of beliefs, among which logic compels human behavior. This, I believe, is an axiomatic truth and observable in the way people think and make decisions. Given that I need to be at work by 9 AM, and given that I consistently require 30 minutes to get ready and 20 minutes to make the commute, I should set an alarm for 8:10 AM, which will ensure that, all other things being equal, I arrive at work on time. Or perhaps more simply, I need blood to survive and open wounds allow blood to escape my body, therefore I should probably not cut my arm off. In both of these examples, the behavior compelled is highlighted in red. These are actions I take as the result of conducting myself and my thoughts by logic. You could reasonably assert that in these situations, logos dictates my life, and this is fundamental to Stoicism as an applied philosophy. Now, as I just mentioned, human will is not singularly governed by logos, it also has ethos and pathos to contend with. Ethos is perhaps the most peculiar of these three pillars. It is not strictly the antithesis of logos or pathos, yet for all practical purposes it has nothing in common with them either. It sort of just does its own thing. Which then brings us to pathos. Given that I need to be at work by 9 a.m., and given that I consistently require 30 minutes to get ready and 20 minutes to make the commute, I should set an alarm for 8:10 a.m., which will ensure that, all other things being equal, I arrive at work on time. Except that when 8:10 rolls around, I hit the snooze button and allow myself to fall back asleep. Because I just feel so f***ing comfortable. In the context of both argumentation and action, pathos constitutes an appeal to emotion, which contrary to ethos is the antithesis of logic. While Stoicism elevates logos, it simultaneously rejects pathos as a governing force in human will for a variety of reasons. The most pressing one is also the most self-evident. With the understanding that logos and pathos are isometrically opposed forces acting on the human will, the assumption of one necessitates a corresponding abandonment of the other. What does this mean? It means that facts don't care about your feelings. And vice versa. People who resort to emotional outbursts and violent rhetoric in doing so abandon logos. People that surrender rationality and reason in doing so succumb to pathos. Logos and pathos are independent motivators to action. Rarely in my experience are they truly corroborative with each other in the course of a person's manifest behavior, at least on the basis of individual choices. I wouldn't guarantee that it never happens, but I found that if you review what a person does with enough scrutiny, you can reduce them to acting on either one or the other at a time. How does this all fit into Stoicism? Suffice it to say, the Stoics regard pathos as an obstacle to the enlightened state of mind, which is not to say that they look upon those who chain themselves in emotional instability as lesser than them, no. The Stoic take is, as always, a pragmatic one. Emotions, what they call passions, are a human trait, one which threatens the stability and the sanctity of the human will. Consequently, Stoics argue the human will is best guided by logos at all times, where possible.
If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment.
Note that Stoicism does not mandate the purge of emotion, which is a firm impossibility. They merely insist upon the mastery of it in the individual's mind. This also absolves Stoics of having to write off all emotion, period. Being a proponent of Stoicism does not mean you can or should try to never be angry or sad or happy ever again, but when you are confronted by a cognitively disruptive event, you must not succumb to your passions, for at that point you are no longer a master of your own behavior.
No, my God! What is going on with my f***ing mouse? F*** you! I just spilled a f***ing drink. God f*** me!
Stoics also do not even universally regard pathos as bad. Rather, they do make a distinction between emotions that are good and rational and those that are not.
Choose not to be wounded, and you won't feel wounded. Don't feel wounded, and you've not been.
Now, logic is obviously the soul of the Stoic ideology, and thus the prime facilitator of human behavior, but it's not strictly the vessel by which the individual's life and identity are governed. That more practical role falls to the element of ethics.
The best revenge is to be not like him who performed the injury.
I've already introduced the concept of ethos in this video, and while I stated outright that it has nothing in common with logos and pathos, that wasn't entirely truthful. Stoics explicitly advocate for ethically compelled behavior, but they also assert that logic and physics are the atomic elements of the universe's expression. It follows that any legitimate system of ethics is woven from an adherence to these principles. We'll further explore how logic, physics, and ethics all come together in the next section, but right now it's important to understand how Stoics model ethical behavior in their worldview.
You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength.
Humans exhibit agency. This is a self-evident truth. But what is also self-evident is that we only exhibit agency over ourselves, not external events or other people, at least not directly. In Enchiridion, Epictetus asserts simply that we are responsible for some things and not responsible for others. Logically, it would follow that Stoic ethics center on the individual and what is within that individual's own control. I cannot prevent other people from being drunk drivers, but what I can do is consciously commit to not driving drunk. I cannot prevent other people from being rapists, but what I can do is consciously commit to not raping anyone. From here we can see the inherent misguidedness of certain other notions such as the belief that I exhibit control over anyone other than myself, the belief that any size group of people can solve problems sourced in the unethical behavior of individuals, and the belief that the unethical behavior of others in our society is fundamentally the product of my failings. Since I am not a drunk driver, it is foolish of me to presume that the epidemic of drunk drivers is my fault. It is also foolish of me to presume that I can mandate that other people not drive drunk, or that drunk driving is a problem that can be solved by the legislature. Likewise with rapists. Such notions otherwise stand in direct contradiction with what we have established about human agency. Now, a person may believe that they can be a part of the solution to a problem that they did not create, and this is not entirely misguided because there are things that we can do to influence the actions of other people. However, what we must acknowledge is that as the problem originated beyond our own behavior, the responsibility for ending unethical practices ultimately rests with individuals. Simply put, there's only so much I can do to prevent forest fires when, at the end of the day, the would-be arsonist has to be the one to put down the flamethrower.
Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be, and be one.
So beyond aforementioned examples of quote-unquote acting immoral, how does Stoicism abstract ethically compelled behavior into a moral philosophy? Well, Stoics generally conflate morality with virtue, namely the four virtues of temperance, courage, justice, and practical wisdom. Consequently, Stoics are expected to avoid deviations such as overindulgence, cowardice, dishonor, deception, and willful ignorance. And it is important to recognize again that Stoicism's pursuit of this virtuous behavior is not derived from any sense of moral superiority or elitism. It stems from the conviction that the universe as we know it is one of reason and virtue, and that for human beings to achieve eudaimonia, i.e. a true realization of happiness, they must govern themselves in a manner that is in lockstep with the universe.
The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Therefore, guard accordingly, and take care that you entertain no notions unsuitable to virtue and reasonable nature.
At this juncture, I'd like to just stop briefly and clarify that I'm not going to make an argument for the existence of God in any form or capacity in this video. This next section is about Stoicism's relationship with the concept of God, and may perhaps briefly also touch on what I believe, aka conjecture. As a philosophy also of the physical world, Stoicism is not lacking in the conception of God, but where God is identified, he must also be defined. The Stoics came to describe God as a corporeal being, though not in the same sense as modeled by the Epicureans before them. That is, God is not a material entity. Stoic ideology finds in the universe a dichotomy of base principles. One of them is matter, which is passive and inert, and exists to be acted on by an external force. The other is logos, which denotes the prevailing living will omnipresent in all of nature. Thus, the Stoic God is considered very much alive, and is likened to a flame burning throughout all time and space, reordering the material realm with reason. Stoicism also hypothesizes that the known universe is created in God's image, and that it converges on God's plan. The Stoic God is a force actively at work in the universe, though at the same time he operates at a higher order.
Never forget that the universe is a single living organism possessed of one substance and one soul, holding all things suspended in a single consciousness, and creating all things with a single purpose that they might work together, spinning and weaving and knotting whatever comes to pass.
Because of their acknowledgement of God's eternality, Stoics are necessarily determinists. They hold with the assertion that the universe is a preordained phenomenon, which is consistent with the principle that there are certain things forever beyond our own control. Summarily, for all the power and impact that is implicit in human free will, it is not binding. And at this you might ask yourself, how do Stoic ethics reconcile with a belief in determinism if the latter expunges choice?
That's a tricky one.
After all, ethically compelled behavior is about us utilizing our free will to live virtuously, to choose the right thing. But if the universe is preordained, how can we concern ourselves with doing the right thing when it has already been decided? And the answer is, we don't know. For all the progress we've made over the course of thousands of years, this is one stumbling block we seem to keep catching our foot on. It's a logical inconsistency, to which the answer seems beyond our reach. But I personally don't think either of these conflicting assertions is necessarily wrong, simply because they conflict. You see, it is my understanding that Stoicism's conception of God is not altogether dissimilar from Christianity, which is why I consider this philosophy to be the closest mankind has yet come to a secular interpretation of the living Word. The Bible itself states directly, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Thus, in its own text, the Bible names God as Logos. The virtues attributable to Stoic ethics are not altogether inconsistent with many of the virtues enumerated by the Messiah and his apostles. temperance, courage, justice, practical wisdom. Similar virtues are presented alongside a message of firm avoidance of things that seek to corrupt the spirit: overindulgence, deception, pride, wrath. These are among the pitfalls Christianity enumerates as sin. And so you begin to understand why I broadly regard pathos as, if God is reason, and our morality is contingent on pursuing that reason through logos and ethically compelled behavior, sin and emotion-induced discord would consequently embody our separation from God's will. Yet the question remains, how do Stoic ethics reconcile with a belief in determinism if the latter expunges choice? And for Christians, the answer to this is resolved in Jesus Christ. With the understanding that humans are born into sin, Christ the Messiah absolves humanity of its eternal separation from God, and the sacrifice is already fulfilled for all that was and is to come. This reckoning inevitably reaches beyond the limits of our mortal perception, but it provides Stoics and Christians alike with an answer as to why we should concern ourselves with what is right and virtuous, even if we occupy a deterministic universe. Though there is much more to discuss with respect to the concept of God and theism in philosophy, I'll be postponing the future delving into that topic for a later video.
It is not death a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live.
To reiterate, we began studying the philosophy of Stoicism with an examination of logos, how it competes with ethos and pathos to drive human behavior, and how Stoics advocated for it as the supreme governor of human will. We then moved on to Stoic ethics, examining the nature of individual agency, choice, and the four principal virtues. Finally, we concluded with a brief look into Stoicism's conception of the living God, and parallels between its interpretation of divinity and that of Christianity. This, I believe, is among the reasons that Marcus Aurelius is such a memorable figure in ancient history. As a Stoic philosopher himself, he came to understand that logic and reason are the heart of all things in nature, and that he would have to model his own morality, his ethos, according to that universal truth. This realization was accrued at a young age, and until his death it never forsook him, which would explain his success. As a practicing Stoic, Marcus Aurelius ascended to prominence as Roman emperor and secured his place in human history for all time.
So you know how things stand. Now forget what they think of you. Be satisfied, if you can live the rest of your life, however short, as your nature demands. Focus on that, and don't let anything distract you. You've wandered all over and finally realized that you never found what you were after. How to live. Not in syllogisms, not in money, or fame, or self-indulgence. When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, and to love. Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. And always remember, our life is what our thoughts make it.